Good morning, and welcome to the Tuesday installment of Allow Me to Introduce. Uh, Today we're going to start, uh, let me tell you more about Allow Me to Introduce. It's published by Wiser Books. And in 2001, uh, Mike Conlon, I believe, at Wiser, contacted me to tell me that they were going to publish a new edition of their 1971 or 72 edition of Israel Regardie's How to Make and Use Talismans, which is a very influential book to me, and it had been out of print for that long. And asked if I would pen the introduction to it. And so I did. And I was happy to, thrilled to. And but for one reason or another, uh, they decided not to publish the deck, which is a very common thing in the publishing industry to start projects and not finish all of them. And so there I was with introduction that I that never got to introduce an edition of Regardie's How to Make and Use Talismans. Uh, so I incorporated much of the material in the magical section of Low Magic, which I've already read for you just probably last month, sometime during my Low Magic thing. So I'm not going to force you to listen to that again, and I'm going to move on to the next chapter and the next part of the book, which is the part of the book called Classics of Magic. Students of the Western magical traditions often disagree on any number of the finer points of the art and how they should or should not apply the practice. There are those who adore Aleister Crowley for his brilliant wit and audacity, and those who despise him for his morals and his lifestyle. There are those who will argue the objective reality of spirits and demons, and those who will argue that even objective reality is subjective. But one thing almost all students of magic, at least those who have been studying for a few years, have in common: our libraries. And I'd wager a lot of your libraries have that little Ankh logo on the spines of your book. It doesn't matter if you consider yourself left-hand path or right-hand path, alchemist or sorcerer, Christian mystic or Thelemic magician. It's highly likely you have the Book of Abramelin, or the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, and Light on the Path, and The Cloud upon the Sanctuary, and the works of John Dee and George von Velling, and of course, Donald Michael Craig and his modern magic. Over the years, it's been my honor and privilege to introduce new generations of magicians to these classic texts and take great pleasure to present them to you. And the first one of those I'm going to do will be my introduction to the 1992 Magical Child facsimile edition, a beautiful edition of A True and Faithful Relation of What Passed for Many Years Between John Dee and Some Spirits. And unless I'm mistaken, that beautiful, beautiful facsimile edition was the technical handiwork of a great, fantastic book designer, James Wasserman. So if you can still get a copy of that at a reasonable price, get it. On July 20th, 1550, the academic community of Paris was ablaze with excitement. The auditorium of Vermeil College was filled to overflowing with the most learned men of Europe. Passionate young students crowded the eaves and pressed hungry ears to the windows to hear an unprecedented lecture on mathematics. The speaker was an extraordinary young Englishman whose commentaries on the propositions of Euclid had stunned and delighted the great minds of the University of Louvain and the court of Charles V at Brussels. Not yet 30 years old, he was being hailed as the new Agrippa, the heir to the great philosopher-magicians, and the first English magus. His name was John Dee, and he was destined to become an ornament of the age, one of the most influential figures of Renaissance England, also one of the most vilified. To adequately profile the life and accomplishments of John Dee would require a series of tomes the size of this one you are now holding. Yet, with very few exceptions, it's only been recently that biographers have begun to scratch the surface and explore the incredible details that have been denied to the public for over 300 years. He was a mathematician, physician, mechanician, geographer, chemist. He was tutor to royal families both in England and abroad. His private book collection at his home in Mortlake was Elizabethan England's greatest library. He was engineer, antiquarian, scientist, theologian, no vain dabbler. He was master of these and a score of other arts and sciences. His inventions, contributions, profoundly affected his world. Why then is he not celebrated with the other luminaries of the Elizabethan period? Why has his name fallen through the cracks of the history of Western civilization? Caller of devils, arch-conjurer, necromancer, invocator of damned spirits, sorcerer, witch, enchanter, black magician. These were occupations also attributed to John Dee. These accusations dogged him throughout his life and defined his reputation after his death. I'll not even attempt to elaborate the details of this unbelievably eventful life. I leave that to two most excellent modern biographies, Elizabethan Magic by Robert Turner, and especially Peter French's John Dee, The World of an Elizabethan Magus. But a brief sketch at this point, I think, is in order. John Dee was born on July 13th, 1527, to Roland Dee and Johanna Wilde. The family, who could trace their ancestry to Roderick the Great, an early Prince of Wales, was not wealthy, but could boast what could be called a middle-class income. His father, a gentleman server to Henry VIII, was not without connections at court. In 1542, his father sent him to Cambridge, where young Dee budgeted his time to enable him to routinely study 18 hours a day. 4 years later, Henry VIII founded Trinity College, and Dee received a fellowship as an underreader of Greek. At Trinity, he also delighted in the study of engineering and mechanics, and he volunteered to be a member of the stage crew in the production of the play Pax by Aristophanes. Amusingly, this is where his reputation as a black magician began. His unique mechanical innovations were responsible for seemingly miraculous stage effects. The illusion of the scarabus flying up to heaven with a man on its back provoked rumors of supernatural assistance. And indeed, the equipment constructed by Dee to accomplish this illusion incorporated advanced technology and invention not taught at the time at Cambridge. In 1542, he took his first trip abroad to consult with the learned men of the day in the Netherlands. A year later, he received his Master of Arts from Cambridge and enrolled in Louvain. His reputation throughout Europe was startling. Scholars of many countries traveled to confer with him, and invitations from kings and emperors were routinely but politely refused. Back in England, however, his reputation as a sorcerer was enhanced. When in 1555 the administration of Queen Mary had him imprisoned because of a false accusation of, and these are archaic spellings that I won't even try to do here, lewd, vain practices of calculating and conjuring to enchant the queen. He soon extricated himself from this fall from grace, and when Elizabeth was crowned in 1558, Dee was a frequent and welcome visitor at court. He was even given the honor of casting the horoscope, determining the date and hour of the coronation ceremony. Ironic, as it was his astrological practice that was part of his problem with Queen Mary. Elizabeth conferred often with Dee on matters of state, international politics, and most importantly, England's adventurous explorations at sea. His knowledge of geography, history, and science was unequaled, and many of the remarkable achievements of the Virgin Queen should be credited to his sage counsel. She became his patron and protector. This royal protection would be needed, for as his reputation as philosopher magus grew, so did rumors and accusations of black magic. The vulgar element saw his odd, eccentric genius as proof he was in league with the devil. His study of Hermeticism, a perfectly natural endeavor for a Renaissance scholar, was viewed by many with suspicion and fear. His house and library at Mortlake were ransacked by a mob of neighbors in 1583 while he was on the continent, and he was slandered in print as Dr. Dee, the great conjurer, by the Protestant extremist John Fox. Dee succeeded in halting the slander, but the damage was done. Dee obviously felt that the discretion he exhibited at home in England would be unnecessary on the more enlightened continent. For 6 years, between 1583 and 1589, he and Scryer Edward Kelly practiced various forms of Kabbalistic and angelic evocation quite openly. I'm going to get a little sip of tea here for my throat. Upon his return to England at Elizabeth's request, he continued to be harassed and accused. Elizabeth was too distracted with court intrigues to offer much support. Dee's last years were unhappy. The plague claimed his third wife, Jane Froment, who mothered all 8 of his children. His own health failing, he was pressured by plots of his fellows to give up his position as warden of Manchester College. He returned to Mortlake with his daughter Catherine, who was to be his nurse in the last years. In December of 1608, after King James ignored Dee's attempt to clear his name by being tried as a conjurer, Dee died peacefully at Mortlake. Now, I think there is enough to finish this up tomorrow because in the second section, we return to the more technical aspects of the Enochian angelic magic of John Dee. So we'll just leave it here at Dee's death in the narrative, and we'll pick this up tomorrow at the same time. I hope you're enjoying these. Also, I'd like to thank almost 1,000 of you who liked and loved our little anniversary message yesterday, and for the hundreds of people who left wonderful comments congratulating us. We do so much appreciate it. And I would have forced Constance to come stick her pretty little head in here this morning to thank you too, but she's got on her bicycle and put on her mask and is going to venture out and do some shopping on her bicycle. So, but one of these days we'll get her to poke her head in. So, until tomorrow, be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will